Did you first grow curious about the paranormal? Dare you dig deeper? You are listening to House of Asher.
And welcome everybody to the show. This is House of Asher, and I'm your host, Steve E. Asher. And how the heck are you, everybody? I'm hoping everybody's doing well. It's been busy. It's been hectic. It's been a very eventful last month or so. Like I said, as you guys know, I've not been on recently as I was dealing with the Rocky Mountain spotted fever situation I found myself in the middle of. Doing better, feeling better, doing all kinds of, taking my regimen like the doctor wants me to. I'm eating a little bit better. In the South, that's, you have greens, like that's collards. You don't have a lot. And I'm not to say that all Southerners don't eat well, but I'm a Southerner who did not. So I changed my stuff a little bit, and I'm trying to be a little bit more mindful of what I'm putting into my body, and it's funny because I just turned 50, and I should have probably knew this when I was 12 or 13 or something, but, it is what it is. But, life choices, life changes, and that's the great thing. You go through different incarnations in your life, and that's just one of the things that you live and learn. Hopefully you live and learn. But speaking of people with different incarnations, we're getting ready to have a guest on here that's touched on so many different facets of things that I find extremely interesting and entertaining. There's a handful of people who I look at what they do, and I go, wow, that, I wish I could have been a fly on the wall for some of these events. And it's pretty cool. I will say that we will be touching on little people, especially the ones that are connected with like Native American beliefs. You go to a lot of different places, a lot of different, cultures and whatnot, and you will have stories of these mischievous little people. And also we'll be touching on the I don't want to say the legend of Bigfoot, because there's a lot of people that feel that that is a legitimate cryptoid, and we're going to get into that. But what we're going to do is we're going to take our first break, and we'll be right back with our special guest. Stay tuned. Wild Hair Studios Rock Shop in Paducah, Kentucky has a lot to offer. Their tagline is positive energy that works, and it really is your one-source shop for healing crystals, aromatherapy, essential oils, unique stone jewelry, psychics, light work, chakra balancing, you name it. Even sound healing, everything. They offer it all. Even classes in light work. And this is all located at 311 Broadway, very centrally located in Paducah, Kentucky. And you can also look them up on www.nicerockshop.com. Make sure to go in there and tell them that Steve sent you and get your enlightenment on. That is Studios Rock Shop in downtown Paducah, Kentucky. All right, everybody, we are back. Appreciate you guys being here. I probably should have said you may be listening to this on Spreaker.com. You may be listening to this on my YouTube page, House of Asher. You can also go to SteveEAsher.com. That's all lowercase together. If you're interested in other shows, other things, other appearances, events, the little books that I put out and whatnot, and you may be listening to on our main carrier, which is Para UK Radio, which is a British company which is kind enough to carry us globally. I'm always in your debt. Cheers, fellas. Okay, so I'm going to run the quick bio real quick here, and hopefully I won't butcher it too badly. Our guest, Mary A. Joyce, has worked for 2 major metropolitan area newspapers as a writer, a columnist, artist, Sunday magazine editor, and feature editor. On the side, she's written magazine articles and 5 other books, which we will get into here in just a bit. Currently, she's the editor of the Skyships over Cashiers website, which features cutting-edge topics. Now, what you got to understand about this lady is that her career has included working for Fortune 100 companies, coordinating art, printing, talking children's books. In that capacity, she's worked directly with many creative teams, including those at Marvel Comics, Golden Books, Mr. Roger Berenstain Bears, and Steven Spielberg's E.T. book staff. And now she's also worked for the largest private printing companies, a major metropolitan air pollution control agency, community college, political campaigns. Good Lord. When do you have time to rest, Mary? And I guess I should say, welcome to the show, Mary Joyce.
There's plenty of time to rest because I did those sequentially. I didn't try to do them all at the same time.
Wait a minute, you can do that? Okay. All right. See,
Yeah, that makes it a lot easier.
it makes me think of the, which, I never asked a later age. I just turned 50. I actually just turned 50 the other day. And I remember the old, I think it was a Looney Tunes cartoon where the one chicken had a bunch of eggs, and the one lady says, "And all this time I've been doing it the hard way." It seems like you really kind of got it figured out and found your niche in here. What got you kind of involved in all this? Was this, something you planned on?
This is really a carryover from my time with newspapers. When I was a feature editor especially, just about anything I got curious about, I could go and dig up a story on it or have one of the reporters do one. And so I've carried over that outlet for my curiosity with the website, which is Skyships over Cashiers.com. So that really was the biggest impetus for getting on this or starting this website, which it's been around for a while now. We started it in 2008.
Well, let me ask you. I know that, and this is coming again from a kid that grew up through the '70s and all that, and in the '80s. And you always had the show. You always had the real hard edge, just like we were talking off air about, like Kolchak the Night Stalker. Had the real hard boiled editor, and then you got one or two, that's their star, and then you've got the young up and coming, female, and she's like, "Hey, look at this," and she's like, just stick with the cooking stories, honey, and that kind of stuff. Did you actually encounter that, or were you lucky enough to have a progressive enough staff?
I managed to get myself to the position of editor, so I got to make the decisions. So if I found something interesting, somebody, either myself or somebody else, could go after it. So I didn't have that boss with their foot on my neck.
Well, you always see that, just like in police stories, because my father had been a cop and actually worked his way up himself to chief of police, and and he never told me about like having that one explosive cop. You're a wild card. Get out of here, that kind of stuff. I guess that was just me believing like everything on television when I was a kid.
Before the show, you and I were talking briefly, and you expressed your interest in cartooning. And I thought you might appreciate this little insight, which I don't think I've shared on the radio before. And when I worked in the cartoon department at the Orlando Sentinel, I found it delightful the way the mind works with cartoonists. And I'll give you one example. We would have groups that would come through the newspaper with a tour. And when they would come to what they called the cartoon department, sometimes, not always, but sometimes the guys would put on these glasses with the funny nose and the mustache, and they would just be going about their work as if there was nothing different going on. And the poor people on the tour didn't know what they were supposed to do because, these guys are going on like they don't have a funny nose and a mustache on. So they just have a slightly different kind of humor. It's usually a very gentle humor, and they were delightful to work with.
Well, I'd actually just seen a documentary, and I don't want to take it too far away from what we're doing with you, but there's a gentleman named Chris Claremont, and he was really big in sort of a second incarnation in the reviving of the old X-Men comics back in the day, because what people don't realize, X-Men, it was always sort of a third string comic. They didn't, because most of them were teenagers. They're coming out of, the early, 60s or whatever. And most of the big ones, Fantastic Four, Avengers, and whatnot. And it was like, okay, well, you had the strong male guy and then also, the sidekick wife and whatnot. But when X-Men come along, it was, they still had a little bit of that Mad Men quality just due to the time, but it was a bunch of kids fumbling through it. And, which, like, if you took certain shows, like I also grew up with a lot of sci-fi, like Star Trek and Star Wars, but like I remember there was a series called Enterprise that come out, and it was like the build up to the Captain Kirk, and a lot of people absolutely hated it. I liked it. It had Scott Bakula. I like Scott Bakula anyway, who was the captain. But it seemed like, for whatever reason, people are funny, and it takes sort of different ways. But he was able to actually introduce, Chris Claremont was, these different characters and really kind of build it up. When were you like kind of bumping shoulders with these guys?
With the cartoon department, that was like, you're going to make me give my age away. That was like shortly after graduating, and that would have been in the middle 70s.
Oh, well, see, that was like the perfect time for that, though. Because, I mean, when I think back of, like, of course, all, like, that was the prime time for, like, made for TV movies and the, Gargoyles and Trilogy of Terror, which I actually have some posters of that right up in front of me, Phantasm, all these sort of um, lower budget, especially compared to now. I mean, you can't get, a commercial made for, 4 or 5 million. But to me, it was an extremely creative time in comics as well because you were doing different things. You were stepping out of that classic hero trope. You had a lot more what I would kind of call paranormal comics. You would have zombie. You had like Moon Knight. You had good lord, like Son of Satan, all those like eerie comics, all that stuff. Which for me was just like where it was at. I grew up on. I cannot remember if you did. You grow up in Orlando, or
No, I'm from the north. I'm a Yankee.
okay, that's okay. I ain't just.
I'm officially a halfback. That's somebody from the north who moves to Florida and then moves halfway back because I live in the mountains of North Carolina.
See, there's nothing wrong with that. My wife's people was from like the south side of Chicago, so first time I met all her family, it was like kind of like Joe Pesci. You want to get some pie? Let's go. Let's get at it. That kind of stuff. I'm like, okay. These guys talk like Bugs Bunny, and then they're looking at me like, wow, Jed Clampett has arrived. So it was,
I hear you.
but
I had to slow down my speaking a little bit when I moved to the South, especially when I, excuse me, worked for Texas Instruments, and I was just talking too fast. And now when I hear somebody talking real fast on TV, it's almost like an attack, and it's like you want to tell them just to slow down just a little bit.
yeah. Well,
By the way,
go ahead.
on cartoon, and we'll try to be kind of timely. There's a new movie out with Tom Hanks about Mr. Rogers.
Yes.
And I want you to know that when I worked at Texas Instruments, we were working on talking children's books, which you briefly mentioned. And one of them was a book that we did with Mr. Rogers. So I got to meet him in person, and he really was like he was on TV. I could not believe it. So it's just the way he is. It wasn't a show.
Well, and that's the thing. You have certain people who, I don't know. Some people say, well, um, he really became his character, but then I'm thinking, well, I think the best characters are the ones that have a part of you in it because it's just your natural thing. If I was to do something, it would have a certain quirky, kind of creepy element to it. Not in a bad way, kind of an Uncle Fester kind of way, and just sort of a
Gotcha.
goofy, silly, whatever. And I think that's what it is. You play to your strengths, and you foster that, and sometimes you fall into a position that works out. And like you said, anybody in any country. You see that guy sitting down taking his shoes off and this and that. You know instantly who that is, or that kind of little piano music at the beginning of Mr. Rogers and whatnot. So yeah, I've not seen that movie. Have you seen the movie yet?
I haven't, but I intend to.
Okay.
I live about 45 minutes from Asheville, and I will be over there at Christmas time, and I'm hoping that will be on the screen while we're over there because I really feel like I need to see it.
Well, yeah, I mean, because like you said, you were so kind of closely connected with the gentleman. Well, I know where I am at is, well, obviously, I'm sure you know where Nashville, Tennessee is. I'm about an hour 15 northwest of that. So I'm almost in Missouri, or Missouri, as they would say here. I'm far enough to yell, and somebody probably would hear me. Pretty close.
Gotcha.
So we kind of grew up more Midwest than we did Deep South. You always have people want to fight and go, well, the South really isn't Southern because they didn't really want to get into the war, which I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't want to either, and all that. So you always have, like, if someone from Texas, we're not Southern. Somebody from Indiana or Illinois, yeah, we're Southern. So I guess it's relative.
Gotcha.
But anyway, so let's touch on your books a little bit if you want to, and then we can kind of bounce around and do this and that.
Why don't we start with the most recent one because it's just come out, and so it's I've only talked about it and it's called Bigfoot Beyond the Footprints. And I did the book for a couple of reasons. One, I realized that I'd done over 70 Bigfoot articles on the website since I think 2010. And there was so much material, and nobody was going to ever find it all because, it goes into the archives. That was one reason. But the most important reason was I got really sick of hearing about Bigfoot footprints, Bigfoot howls, Bigfoot taking sticks and whacking trees, and Bigfoot making tent structures. And my research showed that there's so much more, to the Bigfoot. They have families, they have their own language, they have an interesting DNA. I have stories of people interacting with children. Um, so there's really, actually, this could be considered an insult, but there's almost a human quality to them. And I regard them as our as our cousins. And genetically, you may know this already, there's a Dr. Melba Ketchum who did the original DNA studies on more than 100 samples from Bigfoot, or Bigfoots, or multiple Bigfoot. And she found that the maternal side, the mother side, is human. And the father side, or the paternal side, is some unknown species they have not been able to ever find. So that's the reason I feel I can freely call them our cousins.
Well, can I ask you something real quick? And the only reason I ask is that I am not the cryptid guy. I was always the folklore guy, which touches a little bit on cryptids, but folklore, ghosts, and things like that, demonology, whatnot. And I have some friends. We have a little group here called the Caldwell County Paranormals, and we touch, doing different little things, investigate different places. But I had a friend, and he could never really answer this for me because he's more of a novice. Now you have Bigfoot sightings. Sometimes you'll have stuff like the Mothman and things like that. Is there any possibility that, say, Bigfoot is almost like a pupa type stage of a other creature, or vice versa? Or do you think that they are a standalone?
I really don't. Personally, I don't think so. I never am absolute about everything because we always keep on learning about things. But as of what I know this moment, no, I would not think that's the case.
Okay. Now I was just sort of circling that a little bit because I know it seems sometimes that some of these creatures, not so much that they interact, but they sort of walk the same paths, as it would seem.
They want to avoid us humans, and I personally can understand why. And even when even when people think that they're being violent, they're usually trying to scare people away. I've had multiple reports where people have encountered them, and the Bigfoot are throwing stones or pebbles at them. They never hit the people. They always land around them, and you know darn well they could hit them if they wanted to. I think it's just an attempt to get people to get out of their territory or to leave them alone. The only violent stories I've ever heard regarding Bigfoot have been usually with hunters who are shooting at them. And I must confess, if somebody was shooting at me, I wouldn't be approaching them with my arms wide open.
Right. Well, you always have people, and there's so many different camps. And again, we are throwing at stuff that's kind of not really quantifiable, at least now with the sort of technology that we've got, at least as far as I know, that some people go, oh, well, maybe these are pan-dimensional beings, maybe they are some sort of nature spirit, almost like an elemental, but a type of elemental we're not really familiar with. So do you feel like they're a tangible flesh and blood, something that was here before us, grew up with us? Was it maybe a
everything that I know is they could, well, I don't know, they couldn't have been here before us if they've got human DNA. But there's many reports that they live longer than we do. They seem to be knowledgeable, at least about some of our history. So they go way, way back. And again, in any of these subjects, you can't rule out the possibility that somebody's been doing genetic manipulation. And, you just plain don't know.
Well, can I ask you this? And like I said, I'm just firing off different things, and I apologize. Because you say, okay, they have human DNA. So it's like, okay, there's some sort of cousin or whatever. What's to say that we are not a genetic mutation of what they are, and we are the mutation, and we are descendants from them. Because it depends. I guess maybe it depends on how old. I don't know if they can. I don't think they can carbon date DNA, but I think that they can maybe go, okay, this is closer to say Neanderthal, or this is closer to modern humans. Because of course, then you talk to someone who's say a big UFO buff. I don't want to kind of, if I had hair, puff it up and go aliens, but I do ask questions about it. You have so many people go, well, there was gene manipulation back in with the early humans, and that's how they got the modern humans. And I'm like, well, okay, maybe could it have possibly not went quite 100%, and they made us? Because I don't want to say the Bigfoot are messed up because they're not humans. That's a very, human-y thing to do. I don't think it's a word, but it is now. So, I mean, what do you think is there? What do you think happened? Do you think an event happened, maybe that caused a splintering between the two groups, or do you think we were never, ever really together to start with?
Well, there's, in my opinion, from what I can piece together at this point, is that there's only two ways you could get a Bigfoot. Either there was direct uh, involvement between this unknown species and a human, and it happened that way, or there's been genetic manipulation. There's many things that you have to consider when you think about genetic manipulation. There's so many stories about creatures like the unicorn, or one that's part goat and part man, and that could very well have been genetic manipulation, because I'm one of these people who really thinks that if you go back far enough into our history, that there were civilizations that were more advanced, or at least as advanced as we are now. We have, in recent years, learned how to do genetic manipulation. We have certain scientists who very well could, mix the DNA from one creature and another creature and combine them. There's some of that being done for very good reasons. I think that they've done some of that with pigs, where they're trying to develop a better valve for heart replacements or heart surgeries. So we have that ability. So we can't rule out the possibility of that happening with the Bigfoot too,
Okay.
or with us.
Well, I was just going to say that actually made me think of an example that you were mentioning. I know that, which I believe I think the term for that is when they do that is a chimera, where it's sort of an amalgamation of different elements of creatures. I knew that they were supposedly doing it's either with a goat or with a cow, and they interjected, I guess, spider DNA to where the milk would have some of the fibrous web material, and they were trying to use that for, I don't know, stronger body armor or stronger types of materials, natural materials that you could use for housing and things like that. And so I guess you're just not, clear cutting all the woods down and things like that. But yeah, it does seem like when you look back in all those older cultures, that there's always these sort of stories, and it's sort of archetypal sometimes, the kind of the hero and the demigod and whatnot. But again, how do we know that that doesn't come with a certain amount of truth? I mean, if you look at, of course, like the old Atlantis stories and like the what thing was it called? I think it was called Mu, and a whole lot of different like Shangri-La.
It's spelled U, and it was just the continent that supposedly was in the Pacific and sank, and it would predate Atlantis, or they may have overlapped for a while as two cultures. I don't know which it would be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's sort of a little disingenuous for us to kind of go, oh, well, there could have never been anything. I have friends that do a lot of, they will look for arrowheads and pottery in places and stuff. They're just rock hounds, and a lot of times they have went, like you go so many inches not so many inches per year, like say there's X amount of settlement and build up over, say, a century. And so you go about two foot down, you're going to start hitting Native American cultures. There's a lot of Adena Indians and things like that, Native Americans that were in this area. And they would have worked with people who are mainstream archaeologists. And this is a little bit slightly different, but it's still in the same neighborhood. But they go, oh, okay, well, this is cleared out enough. We can actually go down another couple feet and say, well, there's nothing there. And it's like, well, okay, well, why don't we just, I'll go. And they say, no, throw it in. It's like they don't want to mess with anything that will change up, the apple cart that they've got set up. Everybody's making money. Everybody's happy. I'm not saying it's like a conspiracy theory, but I think some people have been educated to the thing of going, well, this is conventional wisdom. We don't question this. Anything else is either conspiracy theory or whatever. And I think it really is poor science, and I think it's really bad research. But you bring that up to people, they'll laugh you out of the room, and that's unfortunate because there has been a lot of stuff found. I mean, Baghdad battery and things like that, and all these different things found in strata like way early, like closer to like dinosaur times. So, we don't know all that we think we know.
The archaeologists are being very, very helpful in broadening our understanding of what has happened in the very ancient past. Because, like you said, they have found technologically developed things, even buried in coal, down at the bottom of deep mines. How did that get there? And it goes way, way back. So the archaeologists are doing us an awful big favor. There's another book that I did. It's called Tangible Evidence of Jesus. That's the short title. Long title is Tangible Evidence of Jesus Left Behind for Us to Find. And again, the archaeologists and the scientists have discovered so much that expands on our understanding of Jesus. The reason I'm mentioning that is because much of the stuff from the time of Jesus is like 20 feet below the surface. And it's because in the cultures, they didn't haul away a broken down building. They, pounded it into the ground and covered it up and kept building on top of it. So things over millennia got really quite deeply buried.
Yeah, well, and that's the funny thing is that obviously we are sort of victims to tectonic movements and changes, and anywhere you have like a really heavy volcanic activity may not be as likely, but a lot of these places that are like say in deserted areas and things like that, I've had people on that talked about the like the Sphinx and things like that, and they say, well, what's going on the sides of the Sphinx is water erosion. When these were here way back when there was oceans there, or at least really large rivers. I mean, if you go to Montana today, you're going to find seashells and strata, just because that's where oceans were. A lot of that area was an ocean at one time, the great inland ocean. So I mean, we are very short-sighted, and we're very kind of, oh, well, this is what's going on with me, so this is what's the most important thing. The sun rises and sets with our culture, and I think it's I just think that's doing yourself a disservice. Not to mention, well, how like they were talking about in Roman times, they had heated floors and whatnot, and aquifers and all this different stuff, and we're kind of always just rediscovering stuff, and then it seems like we either blow ourselves up or we get some sort of horrible plague, and it, because if you look back like at the Middle Ages and whatnot, it seemed like we were doing all right, a lot of feudalism going on and stuff. But if we had been able to focus, who knows, we might have had the George Jetson car and the backpacks or the jetpacks and all that stuff. I really wanted my jetpack, but so who knows where we'll go. If we can actually pull it together, we might be able to go to those type 1, type 2 civilizations that can really do something neat and really embrace what's going on, because there's so much of the earth. Was it maybe like 1 or 2% of the oceans we have like a clue about, and there's so much stuff under there, like the Bimini Road and things like that.
We've done a lot.
Gosh.
There's been a lot been discovered in Antarctica. In fact, on the website skyshipsovercashiers.com, you can type in the word Antarctica. It just takes you to a Google search, but it gives you at least a way to start to find some of the articles that we've done. I mean, that's another place where incredible discoveries are being made.
Yeah.
So we just have a lot of wonderful things to explore.
Well, in the excuse me, I never make like assumptions or accusations or whatever. I just kind of go, oh, maybe this is a thing, maybe that's a thing. I knew, like, when we were talking about with Jesus, and I am not a particularly religious person, but to me it's an interesting premise. Now, yeah, I knew he had went away for so many years and come back. I think he was like 33 years old, and supposedly he had traveled a whole bunch of different places and encountered a whole lot of different cultures and belief systems and whatnot. I've even, had people speculate. I said, well, maybe he himself had different DNA because he had certain gifts. You hear different people who are like shamans and whatnot that can control their minds enough to walk across, coals and whatnot. And I don't know how much of that is just prepping for that, and how much of that is you controlling your actual matter. But it's for me that's really an interesting story, because you take a person like that who, in so many ways, changed what our modern, at least Western civilization is. So I mean, it depends on where you go in the world. So different people have different views of what who Christ was and whatnot. But there's very few people that's had the impact he's had.
In the book that I had, The Tangible Evidence of Jesus, I do get into things that make these stories of him traveling much more believable. The head of the Montessori schools back, oh God, I think it was back in the 30s. My book has all the information, my brain doesn't. But they had a group that went to a big monastery in Tibet. And while they were there, one of the librarians, or one of the monk librarians, I guess, began to trust two of the ladies, and came up one day with this box, because their books were like rolled up paper in a box. And he brought it out and he unrolled it and showed it to them. And he said, "This is evidence that your Jesus was here." And if you do any religious study at all, you will find that there are similarities between the Buddhism and the teachings that Jesus taught. So he might very well have been influenced by that. Another thing that's interesting is that his Joseph of Arimathea, who's in the Bible only because he gave a tomb for Jesus to be buried after the crucifixion, but he was related to Jesus. He was his great uncle. And there's a lot of details I have about their relationship. Joseph of Arimathea would never have been able to take Jesus' body if he hadn't been a blood relative, because people who were crucified were thrown into a mass grave and just the dirt was poured over them. So that's an indication of it. And Joseph of Arimathea is in the ancient history on his own. He worked for the Romans. He was a nobilis decurio, and he was in charge of the tin mines in southwestern England, in the Cornwall area. And there are stories in that part of the country of him arriving with Jesus, who was a boy at that time. And Joseph of Arimathea took over the responsibility of Mary and Jesus and the other children in the family after Joseph the carpenter died. And that was the custom at that time. A male relative would take over and take care of a widow and his family. And this particular uncle was the youngest brother of Mary's father. And he was also Joseph of Arimathea. He was also the Roman person in charge of the mines, and he traveled in a ship between what some people call the Holy Land and southwestern Cornwall, or southwestern Britain. And so I get into some of that too. There's actually a well still there. It's called the Jesus Well, and it's right near the Camel River, where supposedly the stories say that Joseph of Arimathea would stop to get more fresh water for the ship or for the travels. And Jesus, the boy, would sometimes go with him. They put a very small, like, stone covering over it, like a little teeny mini chapel. It's still to this day known as the Jesus Well. And right now, it's in the middle of a golf course. So this golf course has preserved it, but it's like you go on this green and then they cut out a hole so that you can still see this little chapel, and then you have the fairway all around it. It's quite interesting. I don't know what they do when their ball goes down there.
Yeah, I was to say, I don't know. I don't know what they would do. And if you get the ball back, are you going to have a better handicap? It's going to be like a blessed.
I hope so. If you climb down there to get it, I think you deserve that.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'd say so. Well, guys, we are sitting here and we are discussing a whole lot of different stuff with Miss Mary A. Joyce. We will be talking a little bit more with her right after this commercial break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Wild Hair Studios Rock Shop in Paducah, Kentucky has a lot to offer. Their tagline is positive energy that works, and it really is your one-source shop for healing crystals, aromatherapy, essential oils, unique stone jewelry, psychics, light work, chakra balancing, you name it. Even sound healing, everything. They offer it all, even classes in light work. And this is all located at 311 Broadway, very centrally located in Paducah, Kentucky. And you can also look them up on www.nicerockshop.com. Make sure to go in there and tell them that Steve sent you and get your enlightenment on. That is Wild Hair Studios Rock Shop in downtown Paducah, Kentucky. All right, everybody, we are back. Mary A. Joyce, we were just discussing Jesus and this crazy but interesting story about a well in England. I was going to ask you too, Mary. When you look at some of the I guess the Apocrypha books and whatnot, like the Maccabees and things like that. You have so many different people, like you said, in that part of the world, and here as well, that look at that as, I'm not saying this facetiously, as gospel. And I knew that, like when the counts of was it Arimathea, I believe, when they changed it up, Charlemagne, and they took so many books out and said we got to streamline this so there's sort of a continuity to all of it. Where do you think that falls in regards of the reality and the myth? There's so many people here, like in my neck of the woods, there's a lot of Southern Baptists, a lot of holiness and this and that, and some people just don't really believe that even happened, that there was anything taken out of the books. Like it was literally like, Jesus and Moses are hanging out, and he's, I don't mean that comically, but they're going, hey, write this down. Here you go. Here's your list. Go with that. Gospel. Not a word has changed. And I know just from people taking like the early Greek writings and stuff like that, from now, interpretations are different. I don't know if it was misinterpreted or willfully kind of changed and stuff. How do you feel that jives with what goes on with this, what you've discovered in your book and what most people believe?
Well, in my book, I actually give people a list of 50 or 51 different gospels that were not included in the Bible, and that was all decided when Emperor Constantine the Great decided he wanted to unite all the people, including the followers of the sun god. That's why there's halos around the saints, because it's like they are part of, they're being blessed by the sun too. He was trying to have peace in his kingdom, and that was one of the ways he did it. And then he called a meeting of all the bishops from around Europe, I guess, and they decided which books they were going to put in and which ones they weren't. And who's to say if they made good judgments? And so if anybody is into research, they can find this list of all the different gospels. I'm sure some of them are more credible than others, but some of them have some information that I think just when you read it, it's worthy of consideration. So yes, I think we're getting a very limited perspective. Also, the people who are very fundamental about their faith feel like the King James Version is the only one and God talks that way. Well, the truth of the matter is that the king wanted to have the Bible in the language that his people could read, and that is why it is written the way it is and why it sounds the way it does. That is not any reflection of how God speaks to us, which I think would be much more at a spiritual telepathic level than a booming voice. But I also question if the people at the time of this king really were that great at interpreting old religions or old languages. I'm sorry.
Right. Well, and that's what kind of comes down to. I know, like when you were doing, like in the Hebrew, I don't know how much you know about like these guys transcribing these. It's all done by hand. It's all done very meticulously. And if there is a dash that isn't supposed to be there, or some sort of little brush stroke that's out of line, you throw it away. It doesn't matter if it's a 20-foot long piece of lambskin or whatever it is they're putting it on. So it's very, very, meticulous. And I don't know if, again, like you said, if maybe there was just some typesetting differences in which I guess a typesetting didn't come on until a little bit later. But, it seems like, remember that game when you'll whisper something in somebody's ear and you go around the room and you see what it turned into by the time it got back to you? It's very much like that. We have that natural thing to where, you've ever seen where they've had, like, if you can read this, you have a strong mind, and they have a lot of letters and different stuff in the wording.
Right.
And we fill in words. We generally don't actually, unless you're really sitting down studying it, and I've caught myself doing this, editing myself. You'll think a word is there when it's not, or you'll think whatever the word is there is what you're thinking, but it's actually not that word. Not to mention I'm dyslexic, so it's always a...
Oh, that would make it worse.
Absolutely. But it did make me slow down to have to do that, which you also got to consider then too. The level of education, and it depends on, if you've only got one or two people doing this because they're trying to keep the information secret, kind of a Roman Catholic deal. And I'm not dogging, I'm just saying, there are a lot of books that are still locked away that we're never going to see because the Holy Roman Church will not allow it. So
one of the things that I mentioned that I have like a list of at least 50 different gospels that were not included in the Bible, but one of them is called Mary Magdalene's Gospel. And it's the oldest and probably the most revealing of the Gospels. I do have a chapter on it in my book, but there's a lot of information in that particular gospel alone. So if somebody doesn't want to, try to decide which of 50 ones to check into, that might be one to start with.
yeah.
And the other thing I want to mention, just because we're getting close to Easter, and I'm actually going to do a plug here, Tangible Evidence of Jesus is a great Christmas gift because it just, you know who you want to give gifts to, and it might not work with some people. But if you see people who come from a very strict religious background, but they seem to still have a bit of open-minded, of an open mind, that might be really thought-provoking because the information is not presented in any way of a challenging attitude. It's simply presenting information from credible sources that should be worthy of consideration. And so there's a lot in that. And what I've done with all of my books is that I try to write in a very concise, easy way to read because most people don't have time to read through these big tomes or tomes. And I also have lots of visuals. Just like on the website, there's usually a photo, there's something visual that helps amplify the words. And that's the case with this tangible evidence of Jesus all the way through it. And I personally think it'd be a really interesting Christmas gift for some people.
Well, I was going to say too that I know that the Jesus book and also the book that we're going to talk on here in a minute, the Cherokee Little People Were Real book, are both through Amazon.
We probably don't even have time for the little people right now because there's a lot to that too. So maybe we should get together some other time.
Okay, we could do that too. But I do know that they're both through Amazon, and they can also reach you at the www.skyshipsovercashers.com. I was going to ask you too, what are some different things that you're involved in? Are you going to be doing any appearances or things like that? Or what's some other things that you've kind of got going on that's in the near future?
Basically, I like doing the research and the interviewing. That tends to be where my focus is. I did do a convention in Gatlinburg recently about Bigfoot and UFOs both. I occasionally do things like that. I've spoken at our local bookstore because I'm here and they want me to be there.
Right.
I'm not against doing those kind of things, but I'm limited in how many I choose to do.
Well, and that's the thing. You got to pick and choose. I was lucky enough to. I'm not sure if you know where Evansville, Indiana is, but
I don't know the town, but I know I've been by it or through it or something.
Right. Well, it's just over the Ohio River from Henderson, Kentucky. Anyway, they have a place called Willard Library, and like if you go online, I suggest people to go do this. It's called Willard Haunted. I think it's hauntedwillardlibrary.com or something. Anyway, supposedly they have like a gray lady there. It's a very Victorian time. The lady in white, the lady in gray, or whatever. And I was lucky enough to go up there and do a book signing. And it does seem like certain locations are primed for that kind of stuff. You know, locally, I do okay because people know me. But you may go 10 or 15 miles, and that's just not what they're into. Like I said, especially if you have a very fundamentalist kind of vibe. You know, just like most southern towns, you know, it's like every 20 or 30 buildings, there's probably a church or related to a church or some sort of mission or something. And that's fine. But, you know, some people's they're not looking for a paradigm shift. They're not looking, you know, to, you know, at 30, 40, 50 years old to go, oh, well, everything I thought was this and that maybe isn't that. You know, we're creatures of habit. We very much like, that's why, you know, people talk about changing up your patterns and stuff like that. You know, like say somebody who's changed maybe on the run or something. You always see those shows. Well, don't do the same thing. You know, change up your stuff every day because people fall into a pattern. It's just natural. And I think we're that way with religion and with other elements like that. But I was going to ask you too. So, are you still doing a lot of editing work? Now, I know you're doing the stuff with the Skies Over Cashiers, but are there any things like that you either are doing or would like to do? What's some stuff that you would like to maybe get into that you haven't yet?
Well, it's like the stories just kind of come to me. Like I got a call the other day from somebody who was using Google Earth, and he was just skimming through things, and he happened to see a crop circle right on the edge of the Cherokee Indian Reservation. And he contacted me, and I was able to find it myself, and it's a very detailed one. This is not an area that's known for crop circles, and when you do hear crop circle reports in North Carolina, they're usually the very simple ones. This one is rather intricate. So after the first of the year, I will be posting that on the website. So if people want to check in, you know, sometime in January, they can take a look at that. So you just never know what's going to happen. Then the guy who came to fix my, well, it was the exterminator actually, and he's lived here in the mountains for all of his life. And he's seen UFOs and Bigfoot and little people. So I'm going to be setting up an appointment to talk to him and interview him. He may have more than one story that's worth sharing. That's where my interest is. I like to, you know, find the people with unique stories.
You know, and that's the thing. You have like Travis Walton and guys like that, the big, you know, stories that people know about. But there's so many little things that aren't really little things. They're very incredible things. But a lot of people are very private, especially in little southern towns, small towns everywhere. People are having these extraordinary experiences, but they keep it quiet. You know, they're a banker, they're whatever, their husband or wife's, you know, teaches choir at, you know, at Sunday school, and you just don't want to rock the boat. And some of these things are very personal because you don't know what you saw.
Well, that's one of the things about the book. It's not offensive. I mean, it only enhances what the Bible tells us. It doesn't minimize the Bible. It just brings more to it. It makes it, I don't know, it's just more understandable. It only adds to it, and I think people need to understand that. God gave us curiosities. I mean, that's the way we were designed. And I think that we ought to realize that it's a gift to want to explore our curiosity. That's how we learn. And so, you know, I don't know what else to tell you. I also wanted to mention that when we were talking about evidence that comes up from the ancient past, there is a book, and off the top of my head, I can't remember it, but it's about, there's at least 2 books out now about all the giant skeletons that have been found all over the country. And so many of them were found in the 1800s and early 1900s. And people would have somebody come from the Smithsonian, and the Smithsonian would take them. And my goodness, they disappeared. The Smithsonian doesn't put them on display. They don't talk about it. It's like they've been hidden away in a vault because evidence of giants in North America upsets the general history that is pushed by schools. And it's very disappointing. Sometimes the universities and places like the Smithsonian, they're supposed to be educational places. They're supposed to be places that looking and learning for new information. They're not supposed to be people who put a lock on something and won't go past it. Anyhow, that's my little spiel.
No, no, I'm with you. I'm actually, I feel like I'm doing a shameless plug. I guess I am. But I have a book coming out on Kentucky counties this next year, and so I did one story. There was 120 counties. So there's a part one and a part two. Anyway, and in the first one, there are several counties that would have like 9 or 10 foot tall giants with 6 fingers, 6 toes, multiple rows of teeth. Some are very tall, like Caucasian, like red hair giants that should not work with what we believe is the natural progression of American natives and whatnot. Could it have been variations and things like that? Who knows? But I know that there had been some carbon testing done on these through private organizations that do not say, oh, well, they had giantism or they had this and that. Like sometimes they would find what appeared to be infants with large large craniums, and they go, well, this is what they would call hydrocephalus or waterhead syndrome. But there's genetic markers for that. I know this from having a little boy that had that. They can check that genetically and find those markers, and those things weren't showing up. And you would, just like we have X amount of our DNA, which they kind of call junk DNA, which I don't think it's junk DNA at all. I think a lot of, if they were able to connect with these other creatures, they would find that we are connected at the hip genetically to these different type of creatures. And I think it would give us a more whole and honest look at where we are in regards of the cycle of life and whatnot.
If there's any truth to the stories about the ancient Anunnakis that Sitchkin wrote so much about, then we may very well, the DNA from that advanced outer space community may have been used to create a worker bee here on Earth, because apparently the Anunnaki were very interested in finding gold or mining gold on this planet, but they didn't like doing the work, so they created a genetic mutation that would do the dirty work for them, and so they may have used their own DNA and then dumbed us down. So if you disconnect some of the junk DNA, it may simply be disconnected. And if that ever gets reconnected, we might be a whole lot smarter and happier and beautiful and all sorts of other things that we just don't, exist. But there can't really be junk DNA. There's some reason it's there. Also, before I forget, if anybody's interested in following through on the giants, I found the title of the book. It's called The Ancient Giants Who Ruled America. And that's about all the giant skeletons that have been found actually for a century or two that have been buried away in the Smithsonian. Again, the title is The Ancient Giants Who Ruled America by Richard Dewhurst, Dewhurst. That's probably a good book for anybody curious about that kind of thing. And as far as hiding stuff, you mentioned about the little people, and I have done a book. Are you still there?
Yes, ma'am. I'm listening to you.
Okay. My screen went crazy, and I thought maybe it disappeared. I did do the book, Cherokee Little People Were Real. I didn't start out believing that stuff, but I won't get into all of that, but I began to realize that there's some real evidence that they really are real and have been real. And they had a small skeleton that had, or skull that had all of its wisdom teeth that they found in one of these little people tunnels right here in North Carolina. And they also had 2 giant skeletons with 6 toes that they had there in their forensic storage area. And I ran into a anthropology student out there, I think, it may have been 2 years ago at the most. And she said that they had shipped all of that off to the Smithsonian because they just didn't have what it would take to really fully display and do something with these relics. I found that very sad because they will probably go the way of the missing giant skeletons.
Right. I mean, and I was thinking that you were talking about, there's no junk DNA. I remember when I was a little bitty, there was some shirt that said like, "God made me and God don't make no junk" or something like that. I don't know why I remember that, but it makes me think too of, sometimes there would be people with like prehensile tails and things like that, and they go, "Oh, it's a birth defect. It's a thing." Well, maybe that was some variant that was part of it. Um, Again,
Or it's not that uncommon to find some people with six toes.
right. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, you look at different people like the Fugates, of the Appalachian Mountains that were blue. A lot of people swore up and down it was because of inbreeding and whatnot. And then, some people said, well, no, it was because of the deficiency because their body wasn't able to absorb a certain type of mineral. And then they started getting those mineral supplements, and their skin went back to normal. So, you're always going to have he said and she said, and then the truth. So, like you said, I think once you gather all those loose strings and time together, like I said, we'll get a better idea. Because I don't think you either have people going, well, no, we are, the top of the pops. We're the best. We're the greatest. And then you have some people who says, no, we're just nothing but animals as well. There's nothing different from us from like a chimpanzee or a mouse or whatever. I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think we walk the lines between that because we're all genetically connected. And we all grew, we're part of the same planet. But if you do believe the Bible and that we all, we have souls and all that, there is something special going on. So again, the right now it's open for the debate, as the catfish would say. So
I think we should all be collectors of information. I mean, like go through life like you have a basket to collect and collect them, and then go back and decide. Then you can make a better decision. But if you just take the basket with one apple in it that your mom and dad gave you, um, that's pretty slim pickings.
yeah, and it's a really kind of a sad and cursory way to go through life. It's just why limit yourself? Even maybe even if it's not necessarily the truth that you want, is it ignorance is bliss or is knowledge is power?
Hmm.
You know.
Another thing that kind of gets me is some people, again, it sounds like I'm picking on fundamentalists. I am not against Christians at all. I have certainly been raised in the Christian tradition. However, it wasn't evangelical. And I guess that, makes a whole different outlook on the way life is.
Mm-hmm.
And why am I telling you that? I went off on a tangent and left my major thought behind. That was cute.
No,
Sorry about that.
no.
Maybe
And well, I was just gonna say the great thing is I plan on having you back if you'll come back, and we can really touch on the little people and some different stuff, and so yeah, that's not a problem. I do that all the time.
not a good thing.
No, no, I'm telling you,
Good.
no, it's fine. Like I said, I mean, as much as you do, I don't see how you sit down long enough to eat or sleep.
It makes life interesting. I think life is meant to be interesting. Oh, what I was going to tell you is that there are some people, again, who are very straight laced about most things, and they think that this earth is the center of everything, and that any life form out beyond the earth in the deeper universe, has to be of the devil. And I'm going, hey, now wait a minute. You're limiting the concept of God. God is the creative force behind all the universes, and there's more than one universe. And how would this be the epitome of his creation? You look around and you go, if he's a god, he certainly could do better than some of the stuff we're seeing here on this planet. We are a very violent, argumentative race. And I don't think this is the epitome of creation.
Well, and I think that is part of the growing up thing. I think that's the seeing past your name, your bloodline, your culture, your race, or whatever, to going there's comparable and maybe even better things in other places, and that's great. If I can learn from another culture or whatever, something that's going to better us, I can't wait till there's no hunger, that there's not a homeless child in the world. That's my prayer. Doing adoptions and stuff, we've seen a lot of kids in really dire straits, and for a culture that's so, well, we love our brothers and this and that. Homeless people on the street. We got people that, what I'm saying. I mean, I could feel like I'm preaching up here, but yeah, we've got a long way to go. We can do some great things, but we got some growing up to do, and that's going to be, the challenge to see if we can keep it together, get through these next, century or two. I hope to God and whoever else is out there listening will grow up and pull it together. But Mary, we're right at the end of the time. I appreciate you having you on, and if you'll stick around just long enough, I'll talk to you right after I do this quick outro.
Okay.
There we go, folks. Mary A. Joyce, and make sure to check out the Skyships over Cashier.com. And go check those books out. I know I'm going to be looking at them, and I cannot wait to get her back on to talk about the little people and some of the other things that just wasn't able to be done in an hour's time. Hopefully we'll get some other great shows out of this, and as always, I'm in her debt. But I want you guys to go out there and enjoy the rest of the day, get some sunshine on your face, make some good memories. But as the sun sets behind the pines and the shadows grow long, make sure to check behind your bed, out your back window, and in your closet, because you never know. There might be something kind of spooky and weird back here, but it's okay. In fear there is learning, and also in challenges there is learning. So have a great day. Have a wonderful holiday. God bless, and stay scared, everybody.